Before Korolev could get his plane off the ground, the curse of Stalin's paranoia strikes again. The designer is arrested on false treason charges. He is sent to the goldfields of Kolyma in the far northwest of Siberia. Known as the Land of White Death, Kolyma is the coldest place on Earth, with temperatures plummeting to nearly 100 degrees below zero.
Korolev was rescued by the intervention of Andrei Tupolev. Tupolev was still back in prison in Moscow, but he saw it as his task to rescue all of the young Soviet aircraft designers who had been scattered through the Gulag and bring them back to Moscow, where they could work under reasonably benign conditions, though still in prison.
Others are not so lucky. Many of the key research workers at the RNII Rocket Research Institute are executed. With their deaths, the visionary RP-218 is abandoned. But then in 1941, with the Nazi invasion, Russia turns back to rocket power. She needs a fast rocket-powered fighter aircraft to combat the marauding Luftwaffe.
The trouble with a rocket is it gets through its fuel very quickly, so you're not going to stay up there very long. But it does open the way to unbeatable performance, which is just what you want if the enemy bombers are coming over at high altitude, and you want to go and take off quickly, climb up and shoot some of them down. A lot of Russian designers took this idea on board.
The new plane is called the BI. Its nickname is the Devil's Broomstick. The BI is powered by a rocket motor generating 2,500 pounds of thrust, more powerful than the first generation of jet engines. It is armed with two 20mm cannons on the nose and reaches speeds of nearly 600 miles per hour. It is the fastest aircraft on Earth. Working round the clock, the design team has the first prototype ready by late 1941, only a few months after the Nazi invasion. The BI is being developed at a plant near Moscow, but the advancing German troops are headed toward the Soviet capital. Work on the BI is halted in a desperate bid to move the aircraft and its workforce to the safety of Sverdlovsk, 850 miles east of Moscow. The disruption means the first BI fighter is only ready to fly under rocket power on May 15, 1942. The test pilot is Grigory Bakhchivandzhi, a Soviet fighter ace. The Devil's Broomstick shoots upward at 500 miles per hour. The world's first rocket-propelled combat plane has flown.
The B-1 rocket plane was debuted in 1942. It was a rocket-powered aircraft, plywood construction. It was designed to be an interceptor, to intercept German bombers. And a number of these were built and flown.
Stalin immediately orders the BI into production. Meanwhile, in Germany, work has also begun on a rocket-powered fighter, the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet. But the operational version of the Comet will not fly till 1943, nearly 18 months after the Soviet rocket plane. But the new rocket technology proves difficult to perfect, while the years of delay in which Stalin butchered the cream of Russia's rocket engineers has not helped. One problem is that a rocket motor uses up fuel at a great rate. In a bid to solve this problem, designers mount ramjet engines to the wingtips of the BI. These can be used in ordinary flight, with the rocket motor switched on to climb to altitude, or in the attack mode. Then another problem emerges. On March 27, 1943, Grigory Bakhchivandzhi takes off on a routine test flight. It will be his last.
By 1943, 7 BI-1 prototypes had been built. They had flown extremely well at remarkable speeds, and not least was their ability to climb roughly twice as fast as any other fighter in the world. Unfortunately, later in 1943, the test pilot, Bakhchivandzhi, was making a very fast low-level pass It went into a dive at something like 500 miles an hour, and it set up a longitudinal oscillation, climbing and diving. The pilot had no chance whatsoever.
The Russians had stumbled into one of the major problems of supersonic or near-supersonic flight. As an aircraft approaches the sound barrier, a wall of heavy air builds up in front of the wing, and that can cause control problems and force the aircraft into a dive.
Unable to solve the problems, work on the BI is stopped. The 50 BI fighters under construction are scrapped. The Devil's Broomstick is consigned to history's dustbin. But Soviet engineers remain fascinated with rocket power. Rocket boosters are fitted to most standard Red Air Force fighters to add speed. And in 1943, Russia's top rocket expert, Sergei Korolev, develops a new liquid-fueled rocket motor. It is tested on a special version of the PE-2 bomber. These breakthroughs in rocket technology enable Alexander Moskalev to resume his quest for a supersonic delta-winged fighter.
Russian designers were given a pretty free hand sometimes. 3 of them designed aeroplanes named Strela, which means arrow, and they were always of an advanced delta wing design, triangular. And one of these was a rocket fighter designed by Moskalev. And it would have been, I think, a world beater, because it might have exceeded the speed of sound, had a very powerful rocket engine.
Moskalev's latest project is to be powered by 2 liquid-fueled rocket motors, each with 4,500 pounds of thrust.
Russian fighters generally were smaller than the British and American fighters. They were rather similar in size to the Germans, but they tended to have bigger engines, so often they were faster. And though they didn't have many guns, these guns were world beaters. They were super heavy, fast-firing, high muzzle velocity cannon. You only needed one hit, and you probably had scored.
By 1944, the Red Air Force is on the offensive, and Luftwaffe bombers are no longer capable of threatening Moscow. Stalin decides that the Strehler is no longer needed, and Moskalev's design workshop is closed down by the secret police. The supersonic rocket fighter is abandoned, and Moskalev is lucky to escape with his life. Yet, despite the constant danger of being arrested if you have radical ideas, Soviet aircraft designers go on to propose unorthodox solutions to problems. Even by today's standards, their ideas are astonishing. On the eve of World War II, Russian collective farm workers turn their eyes skyward. They think they can hear the sound of an approaching aircraft, but they can see nothing. Flying overhead is the world's first attempt at a stealthy aircraft.
Well, the Soviet aircraft designers are always interested in imaginative, forward-looking, futuristic types of airplanes. In fact, in the 1930s, curiously, they even had some experiments on building an invisible airplane.
These are the days before radar, but the aircraft of the day are still visible targets. They fly slow enough to be spotted easily through binoculars, and they fly too low to escape the deadly attention of anti-aircraft artillery. One Soviet designer has an answer. He strips the Soviet Air Force plane of its outer covering of wood and replaces it with clear plastic.
It was a 4-seat, single-engined, high-wing monoplane, a very ordinary aeroplane. He stripped out as much as he could of all the existing structure, and he covered it with a transparent fabric which he got from France called rhodoid, which was very much like cellophane.
The aircraft is now largely transparent to the human eye. Of course, the engine and crew can still be seen. But at altitude, they're too small to pick out. There is only one problem.
The problem was that the plastic he was using reacted to sunlight. And after a few weeks, the transparency was lost and you could see the plane again.
A true stealthy aircraft will have to wait another 50 years. Another problem Soviet aircraft engineers are grappling with is airborne warfare. The Red Army is the first to create a large parachute force, but paratroopers are lightly armed and defenseless against enemy tanks. There are early attempts to carry light tanks and artillery into battle, slung under heavy bombers, but the aircraft cannot transport heavy weapons. Another brilliant Soviet engineer has a radical solution to this problem. He is Oleg Antonov.
Oleg Antonov emerged as one of the Soviet Union's most prominent aircraft designers in the 20th century. As a young man, he was interested in gliders. Later on, he presided over the design of a whole series of Soviet aircraft transports, heavy lift aircraft. Perhaps his most unusual project was a so-called flying tank, where they attached wings to literally a tank and used it as a flying machine.
This strange aircraft is called the KT, which stands for Tank's Wings in Russian. A T-60 tank provides the fuselage of the unit, with the tank's tracks being the landing gear. A biplane wing made of wood and fabric is attached, together with a pair of tail booms for stability. The unit is towed to its target by a heavy bomber. Towing speed is 100 miles per hour. Over the target, the flying tank is released and glides to a landing near the battlefield. The wings are dropped as soon as the tank lands. The tank can then move instantly into combat.
Only one KT was ever built, and this was tested in early 1942. And the pilot was one of the most varied and experienced pilots there's ever been, Sergei Anokhin. And they waved away the tug. Off went the combination, and Anokhin broke the tow rope at about 6,000 feet, and he managed to steer this contraption back to the airfield. And we are told he made a rather rough landing. Well, if the idea is, if it's a landing you can walk away from, it's a landing.
It would be the only flight of the flying tank.
The problem was not the concept of a flying tank that you could tow. The problem was there were not powerful enough engines for the towing aircraft to really fly the tank any great distance.
Russia's tanks will have to drive to Berlin under their own steam. But along with flying tanks, Soviet thinking about the use of aircraft for naval warfare would lead to another idea that is truly breathtaking. Early submarines were very slow. They were also vulnerable to attack while traveling on the surface to recharge their electric batteries. On the other hand, aircraft could fly fast and high, but they did not have a submarine's invisibility when submerged.
The junior naval officers in the Soviet Union were very resourceful. And in the early 30s, they came up with the idea of why not combine the strengths of a submarine with the strengths of an aircraft.
In July 1936, the Soviet military's main scientific research committee approves a detailed design study for a flying submarine. It is known as the LPL, after the Russian letters for Flying Submarine Aircraft. For flight, the LPL is powered by 3 conventional piston engines. It carries a crew of 3 and flies at 150 miles per hour with a range of 500 miles. When the aircraft lands on water, panels close to seal the flight engines. The aircraft is painted with corrosion-resistant materials, and it is armed with 2 18-inch torpedoes carried under the fuselage. When submerged, the machine has a speed of 3 knots.
The idea was that the flying submarine would be able to penetrate a heavily defended harbor by flying over the mines and the submarine nets, then submerge and attack the battleships and aircraft carriers that thought they were in safety inside the harbor.
But the technical challenges prove too much for the Russians, and the flying sub is never completed.
The idea of a flying submarine sounds far-fetched, but in fact, during the Cold War in the 1950s, the United States Navy commissioned its own design study for a flying submarine.
The Convair Division of General Dynamics Corp in San Diego was asked to draw up plans for just such an aircraft, this time powered by a jet engine. The craft would be submerged by flooding the wings, tail, and hull compartments. It would travel 5 miles an hour underwater, powered by batteries.
The flying submarine has never